Real Madrid arrived at the weekend with a full trunk of confidence and left Riyadh with headlines that will not fade quickly. A 5-2 scoreline that has already rewritten the early season ledger and exposed the brittle seam beneath the glamour. The score by itself is brutal, but what followed in the mixed zone, the bluntness of Thibaut Courtois and the precise focus of his criticism, turned a single defeat into a potential inflection point for selection, tactics and the club's mood. Courtois did not simply lament goals conceded. He singled out the team's off-the-ball work, the moments when players failed to close, track and protect. And in doing so, he framed a new narrative that in the kind of pressing, intense football Xabi Alonso wants, defensive commitment is now part of the first 11's job description. That is the real shock. If a goalkeeper publicly suggests he prefers one attacker's defensive profile over another's finishing ability, the conversation in the dressing room, in the press and among the fans is immediately different. It's not only about who scores, it is about who defends, who presses, who sacrifices for the team's structure. Against Atletico, the overloads in the box and the repeated incursions down Carreras' flank were not the work of a single defender. They were the consequence of wide men not engaging at the right moments, of a front line that sometimes seemed absent when the team needed to form its first defensive line. The image of an onrushing Giuliano Simeone receiving space to cross is emblematic and unforgiving. In modern football, those moments are decisive and they are judged harshly. That is where Rodrygo's name enters every conversation today. He is not advertised as the flashiest dribbler, nor is he always the first name shouted for a highlight reel, but he brings a relentless motor, a willingness to track back, and an understanding of how pressing triggers pass lanes and isolates opponents. For a coach building a pressing identity, those traits are as valuable as finishing. Sometimes more valuable in matches where discipline becomes the deciding factor. If Courtois' preference is anything more than noise, it becomes a signal to the coaching staff and to the rest of the squad that off-the-ball work is being elevated. Selection will reward work rate, and the player who marries intensity with tactical sense may suddenly find himself starting in fixtures where previously flair ruled the choice. For Vinícius, the fallout is immediate and uncomfortable. He has been a match winner and a talisman in many moments for this club, but the modern top-level winger is a two-way performer. When one half of that job is questioned publicly by a senior teammate, the optics pressure the player to adjust quickly or risk losing ground. The psychological weight cannot be ignored. A season is a marathon of minutes, and when colleagues, fans and pundits begin to whisper about commitment as much as creation, the burden on a star can become a story that affects performance. Meanwhile, for Rodrygo, this is the kind of opening players spend careers waiting for. A visible pathway from substitute minutes to consistent starts, if he can demonstrate the tactical nuances Alonso demands. If Madrid pivot to a more compact, pressing-first plan in coming matches, Rodrygo's defensive discipline could be the currency that buys him decisive minutes and a renewed role in the front three. Yet, this is not only a personnel story, it is an organisational test. Real Madrid's coaching staff must decide whether to double down on their philosophy and demand different contributions from their flashier stars, or to tinker with formations that protect vulnerabilities without sacrificing the team's identity. The supporters, too, will be part of the equation. Fan reactions can cement a narrative or suffocate a player's chance to recover. In practical terms, the next fixtures are the proving ground. Can the team plug the holes that produce the overloads in the penalty area? Can the wide players be coached to press as a unit, to deny simple advances down the flank, to make Atletico's second-half onslaught an outlier rather than a trend? Those tactical answers will determine whether this 5-2 result becomes an early season hiccup or the first chapter in a longer crisis. Ultimately, the most brutal lesson here is that in elite football, talent alone is rarely enough. Structure, effort, and the invisible labour of defensive work matter in equal measure. Courtois' words turned an ordinary post-match critique into a referendum on standards, and that referendum will shape who plays, how they play, and the psychology of a squad that must now respond, not with excuses, but with consistent intensity. The coming weeks will tell us whether Rodrygo's supposed advantage turns into sustained minutes, whether Vinícius answers the questions with renewed defensive application, and whether Xabi Alonso can alter the team's collective behaviour before another headline forces more radical change.